All right, welcome to another deep dive. And today we're going to get into someone who, I don't know about you, but I feel like I hear his name all the time, but I don't actually know that much about him.
Yeah.
We're talking about Mitch McConnell.
The man, the myth, the legend.
Right. So we've got this article here from, I think it's called Investor, Mitch McConnell, the man who shaped modern American politics.
Sounds about right.
So we're going to deep dive into this, and I think
He's a fascinating figure.
he really is.
To me, it's so interesting how much his, personal journey, his story, really shaped how he does politics.
Totally. And you've got to wonder, right? How much of it is the crafted persona versus the real guy. One of the things that jumped out at me right away was that he had polio as a kid.
Oh, yeah.
Which left him with a limp, right?
And I think that experience, the isolation, imagine that as a little kid.
Yeah.
And just the sheer grit it took to, relearn how to walk. That seems to have really built this, foundation of tenacity for him politically,
Oh, absolutely.
He learned early on that you got to play the long game. Sometimes you have to weather the storm to come out on top.
It makes you wonder how much of that early fight, kind of fueled him. It's almost like he took those lessons from physical therapy and just applied them to politics, right?
It's a recurring theme for sure. Even his early interest in politics, it's kind of a surprise.
Oh, yeah.
You might be surprised to hear that he was actually really involved in the civil rights movement.
Whoa.
Advocating for equal rights, even writing opinion pieces about it.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Marching and writing op-eds.
Yeah.
That's crazy to think about considering where, the Republican Party went, towards conservatism,
And that's what makes it so interesting,
Yeah.
right? You have this idealistic young guy who seems to really believe in equality, and then you have the pragmatic political operator that we see today.
How do you get from point A to point B there?
Right.
So we've got young McConnell, shaped by adversity, gets into politics, and he's surprisingly idealistic, at least at first. Where does he go from there?
So he starts out as a county executive in Louisville, Kentucky,
Okay.
which,
Pretty blue state.
yeah, not exactly a Republican stronghold.
Right.
And he learns pretty quickly that connecting with voters, it's not just about charisma. It's about strategy. It's about building those alliances.
So he kind of had to adapt, right? Figure out how to win it in a place where his party wasn't necessarily the dominant force.
Exactly. And it's wild to see how he tailored his message to try to appeal to a broader audience. He even got endorsements from newspapers that typically leaned left.
Wow.
This guy knew how to play the game, even if it meant going against the grain a little.
That's interesting. So then he runs for the U.S. Senate.
Yeah.
And
Against a popular incumbent.
right. So how do you pull that off?
He brought in a secret weapon,
Oh.
Roger Ailes,
Mm.
the guy who would become a giant in conservative media.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But at the time, he was known for running these, really hard-hitting, sometimes even controversial campaigns.
So a bit of a gamble.
Yeah.
Did it pay off?
It did. Ailes helped him craft this message that really resonated with voters, and it propelled him to victory and basically launched his national political career.
Wow.
He realized early on that to win in the big leagues, you got to play by a different set of rules.
Okay, so now he's in the Senate. He starts climbing the ranks and eventually becomes the Senate Majority Leader, right?
The longest serving in history, in fact.
Wow, that's impressive.
And that's where you really see his strategic, what some might call ruthlessness, come into play,
Okay.
particularly when it comes to shaping the judiciary.
You can't talk about McConnell without talking about the Supreme Court.
Exactly.
His blocking of Merrick Garland's nomination to the Supreme Court during the Obama administration.
One of the most controversial moves in recent history.
Yeah.
The Senate has to confirm Supreme Court nominations. By refusing to even hold hearings for Garland, he basically weaponized Senate procedure.
Hmm.
Some argue that it really undermined democratic norms.
But on the other hand, his supporters say he was just playing hardball, using the tools he had to advance his party's agenda. I
Yeah.
mean, you got to admit, he was incredibly effective.
No doubt about that.
And then he championed the confirmations of Trump's conservative nominees.
Shifting the balance of the court for, a generation.
That's a legacy that's going to be debated for a long time.
Oh, absolutely.
So we've got this guy who started as a young idealist, embraced pragmatism, bent the rules, and ultimately became one of the most powerful figures in American politics.
And we're just getting started.
It's wild. How much of this was calculated ambition versus a genuine vision for America?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
He's a fascinating and, frankly, a pretty confounding figure.
And that's what we're here to unpack.
Let's dive in. It's funny. This article keeps talking about him as this man of contradictions. And it's like his career is almost like a case study in how those contradictions play out in politics.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, on the one hand, you have this guy who was, like we said, was really into civil rights.
Right.
But then later on, he's aligning himself with a party that's, been criticized for their stance on certain social issues.
Yeah.
And then you have this, like, quiet, almost reserved guy, but he wields power in a way that's, not passive at all.
Right. It's like he embodies, like, the tension in American politics.
Totally.
This push and pull between idealism and pragmatism.
Yeah.
The strategy, the compromises.
Makes you wonder how much of his, like, political evolution was a true change versus, like, just adapting,
That's the question, right?
Yeah.
And I think it speaks to something bigger about politics.
It's that.
It's rarely black and white. People change. Parties evolve. And to get power, you often have to make compromises that lead to those contradictions.
So true. But let's talk about his legacy,
Okay.
especially his impact on the courts. Like, how do you reconcile that with the fact that people say he made politics so much more polarized?
Yeah, it's complicated.
Yeah.
No doubt his moves, especially with Garland, totally changed the court's makeup ideologically.
Right.
It's more conservative now, and that has, like, real consequences for everyone, from healthcare to voting rights,
I mean, but wasn't blocking Garland, like, fundamentally undemocratic? Like, how does that square with the guy who was all about equal rights earlier on?
Well, that's the debate, right? Some
Yeah.
people say he just outmaneuvered everyone, playing by the rules of the Senate.
Right.
Others say he, like, exploited loopholes and pushed the boundaries of fair play,
Yeah.
which, contributed to that gridlock in Washington.
You can't deny that things have gotten way more polarized while he's been in charge.
True, but it's not all on him. There's a lot going on, like social media, the changing demographics of the country.
So where does that leave us? Like, is he the bad guy? A visionary? I don't even know.
I don't think we can say for sure yet,
Mm,
History has a way of showing us things we didn't see at the time.
it's true.
We're still living with the effects of his decisions.
Yeah, especially with the Supreme Court.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got this guy who was idealistic, then gets into power, plays the game, shapes the court, and now we get to this point where he's having these health issues.
Yeah, those moments when he seemed to freeze up
It was scary.
made everyone wonder how long he can keep going.
Right.
And that's amplified by the fact that he's been in charge for so long.
It's hard to imagine the Senate without him, honestly.
It'd be a huge power vacuum in the Republican Party and in the Senate in general.
Totally.
It's impossible to say what would happen then.
Like we're at the start of a new chapter or something.
Yeah, for him and for politics in general.
And that's what makes this deep dive so interesting.
It is, isn't it?
It's not just history, it's about now and what happens next.
Totally.
Like, who knows? Maybe he'll surprise everyone and keep going.
Yeah.
Or maybe this is it and we're about to see everything change.
Either way, the stakes are high.
Yeah.
The decisions made now are going to have huge consequences.
So we've talked about his idealism, his rise, his moves, the court, his health. But I still feel like we don't really know him,
Like, what's he really about?
Right.
This article hints at this, like, deep need for power and control, maybe because of the polio.
Overcoming that must have taken so much.
Yeah, it must taught him to never give up, to never be underestimated.
It's like those lessons, they became his political playbook.
Exactly, and that's why he's so tough to beat.
He's not going to back down easily.
Nope.
Thinks things through, makes hard choices.
And plays to win.
But is it all about power? Or is he driven by, like, some belief system?
That's where it gets tricky.
Yeah.
Some say he's a true conservative, that everything he does is to push that agenda.
Others say he's more practical, that he'll adapt his views to get what he wants.
And the truth is probably somewhere in between.
Like a mix of both.
Yeah, it's probably a bit of both, ideology and ambition.
Makes sense.
It's like he's playing this multi-level chess game, always balancing his beliefs with the reality of power.
And the need to win.
Exactly, and that's what makes him so fascinating, so frustrating.
He's not easy to figure out.
Nope, he doesn't fit in the box.
So is he good or bad?
I think those labels are too simple.
Yeah.
He's a product of his time, a reflection of how messy American politics is.
It's like he embodies the whole system, warts and all.
Exactly, and that's why understanding him helps us understand American politics as a whole.
So where do we go from here? How do we put all these pieces together?
That's what's great about deep dives like this.
What do you mean?
We don't always get clear answers,
Right.
but we get a better sense of how complicated things are, all the nuances.
And with McConnell, there are a lot of
Oh
nuances.
yeah, tons.
But that's what makes him so interesting.
It's what keeps us coming back for more.
He makes us think critically, question what we think we know, and face the realities of power.
And he reminds us that politics isn't always good versus bad. It's about different visions for the future.
It's about figuring out how to compromise and make things work.
And ultimately, it's up to each of us to decide what we think of his legacy.
How we weigh the good and the bad, and how we see his impact on history.
It's a lot to think about.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we'll be talking about this for years to come. But that's the beauty of these deep dives.
What is?
They make us talk, challenge our views, and think deeper about the things that shape our world.
And that's what it's all about.
Exactly.
Helping people become informed and engaged, ready to grapple with the tough stuff and be part of the conversation.
That's how we make a democracy work.
Well said. And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into Mitch McConnell.
We covered a lot.
We did.
Looked at things from all angles,
Yeah.
and hopefully left you with more questions than answers.
And that was the point. It's not just about getting to a conclusion, it's about the journey of understanding.
Absolutely.
You know, it's amazing. We've spent, what, like 2 hours talking about Mitch McConnell?
At least.
And I still feel like, I don't know, there's just so much more to uncover.
He's definitely a complex guy.
Yeah, like a puzzle or something.
But all these contradictions.
But somehow they all add up to make him one of the most powerful people in American politics.
Like, if you wanted a picture of how messy the American political system is, you could just point to Mitch McConnell.
Totally. We've talked about the strategy, the courts, how he's been accused of making things so much more divisive.
Right.
But who is he really? Like, what drives him?
The article touches on this idea that he has this, like, deep down need for power, maybe because of what happened when he was a kid with the polio.
Yeah, to have to go through that, it must have been so tough.
Having being a little kid and having to deal with that.
Not just physically, but like emotionally too.
Exactly.
But he didn't just overcome it, he thrived.
That shows you how resilient he is, how determined.
It's like he took that experience, that fight, to like literally walk again, and he brought it to politics.
Wow. Yeah, I see that.
Like he learned early on that whether it's walking or getting ahead in politics, you got to be tough, think strategically, and play the long game.
And he's definitely a master of the long game, politically.
No one can deny that.
Like, the way he can see what his opponents are going to do,
Yeah.
he's always a few steps ahead.
He holds his cards close to the vest.
And then, bam, he strikes when you least expect it.
People call him the chess grandmaster of politics.
And it's true. He sees the whole board, knows how every move affects everything else, and he's not afraid to lose a little now to win big later.
But is it all about winning, about power? Or is he, like, actually driven by some set of beliefs?
That's the big question, isn't it?
I think people will be arguing about that forever.
Probably.
Some people say he's a true conservative, that everything he does is to push that agenda forward. But then you have people who say he's just a pragmatist, that he'll, like, change his stance if it helps him get what he wants.
And I bet the truth is it's a mix of both.
For, like, a little bit of this, a little bit of that.
Ideology and ambition, conviction and calculation, all mixed up.
It makes sense, right? Like he's playing this game where his own beliefs, his desire to win, and the realities of power are all pushing and pulling him in different directions.
Exactly. And that's true for a lot of politicians, I think.
Yeah, it's not often you find someone who's purely driven by ideals or purely by wanting power.
It's usually both in some combination.
So at the end of the day, what's the verdict on Mitch McConnell? Is he a good guy, a bad guy? A genius, a manipulator?
I don't think it's that simple.
I know, it never is.
He's complicated, a product of his time, the system he's a part of.
He's done things people admire, things people hate, and his impact on America will be debated for a long time.
He's like, what do they call it? A Rorschach test.
Yeah. You see what you want to see in him?
If you want to see a conservative hero, you see that. If you want to see a symbol of broken politics, you see that too.
And that's the big takeaway for me from this whole deep dive.
What is?
Mitch McConnell shows us that there are no easy answers when it comes to politics.
Right. It's not black and
He
white.
reminds us that it's messy, that it's about power, and that sometimes even the best intentions can have consequences we don't expect.
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into the world of Mitch McConnell.
Man, time flies.
It does.
We covered a lot of ground today, heard lots of different viewpoints, and hopefully you walk away with a better understanding of who this guy is.
Yeah, even if we don't have all the answers.
And even if we're left with more questions.
That's what it's all about, right? getting people to think, to question, to keep learning.
Exactly. So as you go about your day, think about this. Mitch McConnell's story shows us just how dynamic and unpredictable politics can be.
Yeah.
People rise to power, power can be used for good or bad, and the choices we make have ripple effects that can last for generations.
So stay engaged, stay informed, and keep asking the tough questions.
Because the future of our country and the future of American politics depends on all of us being involved, talking about these things, and helping to shape our shared destiny.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And until next time, keep diving deep.